Recording first. Okay, there we go. Good morning. This is Lucy Jameson from Nashville Pagan Pride Day. I have the pleasure to introduce Lawrence Lerner. His workshop will be Many Faiths, One World, Coming Out as a Pagan. Lawrence is a practicing pagan and a witch who began the spiritual journey in the late 1980s. He is a priest of Eris, president of Pagan Pride Day in Western Washington, and works with working on pluralism, Earth First religions, gender equality, and economic empowerment for all. He is a prolific writer and frequently requested speaker across business and faith topics. He was honored to speak at the 2019 World Economic Forum in his role as a priest and venture capitalist. He will be a speaker at the 2021 Parliament of World Religions. Lawrence, thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me this morning, and hello and merry meet to everyone that's watching or coming in afterwards. Really looking forward to this and would really like this to be an interactive workshop. And please feel free to just interrupt with questions, raise your hand, whatever you're personally comfortable with. We are being recorded, so just a reminder on that. I'm going to look back and forth between screens to try and catch any questions, but if our exceptional moderator and tech support, our techno wizard, would also call out. But unless there are any initial questions or things you'd like me to cover, or it occurs to you along the way, excuse me, call it out now. Otherwise, let's begin. Can everyone see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Excellent. So this is from the Pew Internet Research Survey from 2014, and this the link is in here, and it's one of the more comprehensive religious surveys and one of the few that's actually been done across the broad landscape in the United States. And this is very US centric, and most of what I'm going to talk about is US centric, but I do have experience as a business person in Europe and in Asia and in other parts of the world. So happy to field questions there. But as I talk about HR issues and some of the other things, those are really coming from a US centric point of view. I'm not an HR professional, but I have been responsible for people and hires all around the world. So anyway, the survey shows about 1.5 million people who identify as pagans in the United States at around this time, and talking to other people who are scholars and professors at universities who are actually out pagans as well, have validated their own research, firsthand primary research of speaking to people who identify as pagans. I live in Washington State, and what's really nice for me personally is that we have a pretty high percentage of people. We've got a population of just over 7 million. About 2% of the population does identify as pagan or Wiccan or some other Earth First religion, and we're starting to see a lot more diversity as people do that identification. They identify as a druid, as a heathen, as some other pantheistic, polytheistic religion. We're also seeing an extraordinary rise in what we call the religious nuns, or what the surveys called a religious nun. And that nun is people who identify as having very strong spiritual beliefs, but not in a recognized or recognizable faith. And very often, because pagans are still in the broom closet for the most part, they will say, I'm very spiritual, but I don't care to share a religion, and I'm not comfortable or they will just say, I'm very spiritual and I feel religious, but I don't recognize any of the organized or traditional religions. So we do see pagan traditions across a wide berth, above and beyond British traditional Wicca and many others expanding in the United States and all over the world. And what you see is a great diversity of people who are willing to start speaking out about it, but people do have personal concerns. And my own journey has been such that, and you're welcome to ask questions, has been that I was in the broom closet, as we say, for a very long time. And then things changed in my life, guidance from my patron and from others. And as I've worked with people, even within the Correllian tradition, which is doing the video cast for us today, have helped me and encouraged me to come out. And when I came out in the business community, somewhat well known for work that I've done in technology over the last 30 years in digital payments, especially in blockchain and cryptocurrency, it became a really interesting conversation of topic, which led to questions and acceptance and a lot more there. The other big takeaway from this slide is the difference between pagan faiths and witchcraft. Witchcraft is recognized in many countries for very different reasons, but it is not a religion. And that is a benefit to us in many different ways, and we'll talk about that. But it also doesn't give you a religious exemption. So if you come out as a witch and you share your beliefs, they are protected in some ways, but they do not fall under religious protections, and they are not considered, at least by the US government, witchcraft is not considered a religion from there. Of this or that faith, and people are adopting paganism, witchcraft. Those are all interesting things and they make for good media fodder. But at the same time, this isn't about us saying, hey, we're here, we're better. It's about establishing a religious identity and trying to create some equality for that religious identity, because we've all heard conversations about privilege based on skin color, based on gender, based on social status, based on a lot of different things. And here, what I think we're all trying for and we're all working towards is to establish a religious identity that is valid, that is accepted, where you can find the things or practice your beliefs openly without fear of reprisal, questions, or some form of discrimination. And it's about creating cultural norming. If we looked back at faith 1,000 years ago, or even hundreds of years ago, we would know that people didn't say, well, I'm this or that. They might identify with potentially one of the Abrahamic faiths, but beyond that, they would say, this is the way I live my life in accordance with nature, with the gods, and it is all part of the normal culture versus being considered an exception or something that was a curiosity or something that needed to be questioned. It was just the way people lived their lives. And I would offer, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, is that as pagans and witches, we would like to just be able to live our lives in society, in culture, outside of the stereotypes that you see in popular television, movies, and everybody enjoys a little bit of fun and fantasy. But at the end of the day, we have beliefs that are nature first, earth centric, very much about equality for of all and for all that we would like to see in our everyday lives and society, and not have to worry about, if I say the wrong thing or make the wrong comment, am I going to be marginalized? am I going to be discriminated for against me because of something that I believe in or that I say? And that kind of leads us to, what do you say, how do you say it, and when do you say it? And communication is key in anything, any kind of relationship, in business, whether you're teaching a class on baking or math or finance. How you communicate and what you say becomes really important. And I would offer that you want to avoid some generalizations and sort of vague booking when you're talking about it. Say it all or not at all. Well, what's your faith? What do you believe in? Well, it's complicated. And now you've put the burden on the listener to go, well, what do you mean it's complicated? They can either ask you more questions, and if you hold back on answering them, then what you end up with is whatever suspicions come to their mind, because people like to fill in the blanks. They will ask questions, and when they don't receive answers, or they want to assume, they'll jump to some conclusion that you didn't answer because there's something else going on. And sometimes you'll get genuine concern because what they've heard, right, and this is your opportunity to change a mindset, or at least open their minds to the possibility that all the things that they've heard about witches, or that they've seen in pop culture or on what used to be album covers and are now the artwork that we download on our music, was not what they expected. And you also want to be mindful of the context of where you are and where you're having this conversation. If you're having it at work, it may be something that you want to take offline and not in the middle of a meeting because your pentacle slipped out during a work session, or you openly, I'm fairly inked, and my tattoos are generally quite visible when I'm wearing short sleeves, that people have questions. Well, what does that mean? What does it symbolize? It looks like I have the elder Futar Tiwa's tattooed on my forearm, which looks like an arrow. And it asks the question. Someone said, hey, you're pointing a spear at me. And we went through what it means. And, if you grew up in Iceland or in any of the other Scandinavian cultures, this would be part of your alphabet. So we've had that question. And then as people start to engage you in dialogue, you are not required to be the spokesperson for all pagans, or even all Wiccans, or Asatru, or whatever happens to be your belief. Do remember that you can be in control of the conversation. You can say, I'm not comfortable talking about that right now, or I would love to talk to you about it, in this setting or in another setting. You always want to be mindful of where you are, because sometimes this setting isn't appropriate, or people have a mindset at a particular time, and their adrenaline level is elevated for whatever reason of where you are. But you as a person, and this happens very often in other cultures and in other areas where, well, what do you think about this as a blah, right? As someone who's been in tech, as a programmer, and I was a developer for a long time. Well, as a developer, what do you think about this? And that's sort of a professional, innocuous question. But when it comes to culture and religion, you don't need to be that spokesman. It's your choice on how you answer, but also if you're a baby witch or a new pagan, or not very familiar with something, and someone pulls up a point that they heard that you're not familiar with, be really knowledgeable about it. Don't fake it till you make it. Otherwise, you come off sounding, not sincere, this sounds made up, And maybe, they're more knowledgeable than you are because they've done some research, because they knew someone else, or they had some other questions that were, perfectly legitimate. The other questions the other thing that comes up, hey, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings aren't real, right? And they think this is some kind of elaborate cosplay or fantasy or gaming, role playing that you're doing, or that you've picked up an aesthetic that you find really interesting, and that this is an act or some shtick that you're putting on for people because you want to give off an appearance of being someone or something else that you aren't necessarily. I think that's, you are in control of how those conversations go. And when it feels that you're out of control, find a graceful way to exit. And then there are people who are going to ask genuine and honest questions. It's like, hey, you said you're a devotee of Hecate, or you're really, part of the mindset that Thor is the protector of humanity, and that those sound great. But are you Scandinavian? Are you Greek? Have you come from those countries? Are those things that are important to you? Is it something you grew up with in your native country? No, you're not. Well, how can you be how can you worship Greek gods or South American gods? Isn't that disrespectful to those cultures or to those people if you're taking those on and you didn't come from that country, or your family is so far removed and you're 1/32nd Irish and you worship the Morrigan, or you're a devotee of it? And those are legitimate questions for people to ask, and you can explain where your belief system came from, as well as, the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation, because we do see a fair amount of it in society today. And knowing the difference, especially when you see someone who adopts an aesthetic and they say, look, dressing this way, wearing a pentacle, wearing a lot of jewelry, and I wear a lot of crystals. I actually wear a lot of jewelry for an old white guy in modern America. It doesn't make me powerful. I know what the symbology is for all of it. And that's the difference. You can explain and you know what the symbol means. You've come to an appreciation over your life of adopting this, listening. It's really important to listen and to learn, and also to adopt it all or not at all. There are parts of, if you're going through and cherry picking religions and cultural pieces, that starts to look like appropriation. Oh, well, you only do, these practices and these things, or if your spiritual practice requires fasting, it requires lighting candles, whatever it is. Those are the things that you do need to adopt as well and pick them up as part of your practice or your tradition. That's something you may discuss with others, and there's opportunity to learn from others. But it's also not an excuse for you to pick them up, because I want to emphasize with people who've had this cultural experience, so I'm going to dress this way or wear my hair this way or wear these symbols. Those are appropriating something to make you feel good or to make you stand out, versus really picking up a piece of a culture and taking it all in. And it means you need to take the bad with the good. And again, be super knowledgeable. Again, if you're a baby witch and just learning. There's no harm in that. I know many witches and pagans who started on their path when they were adults or later in life versus being born into a family that where they're second, third generation. Just ignorant, but ignorance isn't an excuse. Oh, I didn't know what this meant. If you're going to have this tattooed on your arm, you should really know what it means and why it's culturally appropriate to do it or not do it, and how it's been part of your life. And I actually have many fascinating stories about how this has become. And I've only recently gotten this tattoo within the last 2 months. It's become a very deep and profound part of my life, as well as the others that I wear. So think about all of those things. It's all in context, and it is about you and how you live in accordance with your community and those around you. And you're not looking to avoid offending people, but you shouldn't be going out of your way to say, hey, I've adopted this, or I do this to not offend or offend anyone. So you want to come out of the broom closet. Terry, did you have a question?
Actually, yes. This kind of falls into something that I was talking about earlier. I'm, I guess, an elder of my group. We don't have leaders. We just sort of like switch off, and like whoever is hosting, that's who is the high priestess for the night. But we're a teaching circle, so I take in a lot of new people. And what piece of advice would you give someone who is new and is kind of afraid to share with people that they've chosen this path? I don't really know what to tell them, because I've never felt that way. I've always been like, I'll scream it from the rooftops. It doesn't bother me. You can come at me however. So I don't know how to help them.
Good question. Good question. I'm going to go through some of those things on over the next couple of slides. So if I don't cover or touch on something, just call it out. So the
Okay.
first thing that I would offer to them is to do your shadow work. Know what the things are that bother you about coming out or sharing something. If you're not a big sharer, excuse me, then think about what makes you comfortable about sharing personal things. I have a fear of spiders. I have a fear of mirrors, whatever it is. I don't know how the people in my life are going to respond to this. So before you start discussing it with them, think about that. And it is always your choice of what you do. You are not obligated to show them something, because as soon as you say you're a witch, and depending on who they are, what their background is, great, show me some magic. Make a birthday cake appear. Well, that's not how witchcraft works or magic works. And walk them through how we do energy working, because their beliefs are covered by what they are colored by, what they know, what they've grown up with, or they become curious and say, well, do something for me, or they don't want to admit it, but well, I am curious, and what are you going to do? Make those decisions internally, write it down. I highly recommend for everybody, no matter what you're doing in any form of life, journal. And it doesn't have to be fancy or expensive. It can be the cheapest notebook that you can find and a disposable pen. You don't need fancy. If you want to, great, but journal, write it out. What are you feeling? What did I do today? What did I learn today? What do I think people, my parents, my siblings, significant others, friends, the people who live next door to me are going to say if they walk in and see blessed be, a pentacle, a witch lives here? and some people will laugh it off as a joke. All of those things. And know whether you want to do it fast or slow. You're going to know those people and know yourself really, really well. Or you should know them well enough if you're going to share it with them. It's like, hey, sis, I need to tell you something. And, if it's a sibling, this is someone you've known all your life and probably as an adult going on 20 years. I've decided to adopt Wicca as a religion. That's a really fast way of saying it. And then you need to be prepared for the rest of the conversation with that person. Or do you start dropping hints? I think I'm going to go to this nature ceremony. You know how I've been lighting candles and, redecorating my place? And you've noticed I've changed some of the things that I wear. I'd like to talk to you about something. Having one foot in and one foot out, I will give you Lawrence's personal opinion, do what you want, is a really bad idea. It becomes, people aren't sure if you're serious, they don't know what it really means, and why you would be doing this on any given day. But it does, and it also affects your lifestyle, right? As pagans, we're recycling. I get greased like, why do you compost everything? Because I want to return the things to the earth. I don't want waste. I look for things that are ecologically friendly. I bring my own bags to the grocery store. I actually get a lot of questions about these pull-tie bags that I bought for vegetables. So I'm not using 100 plus bags every week when I buy vegetables. I'm a big white guy. I'm 6'1", and lift weights. You're a vegetarian? Really? I mean, you get all kinds of interesting questions about lifestyle. So as you come out of the broom closet and you start to think about it, think about those things that you want to share. And one of the other things is you have to be ready for the, okay, you're a pagan. Great. Where are we going for lunch? And you're all prepared to have this really in-depth conversation. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe it's because they really don't care. They're uncomfortable at the moment, and you need to give them their space and acknowledge that they need it. Or I find that some people are very a-religious or uninterested in those things, or they just don't want to talk about them. Be prepared for that, because I know you spent, as we all do, we're as witches, we're big preparers. We do our rituals. We spend a week thinking about how we want to do this and who we're going to approach. And the big moment comes and they go, oh, well, that's kind of cool. Let's go to the movies. So think about those things. Yes, Jeff Corey.
Well, thanks, Lawrence. I appreciate this, because this is something that really means a lot to me. You probably can tell by the way I'm talking, I am from Tennessee. And I have to encounter a lot of Christians, born again Christians, and I will say with my family, they're pretty acceptable about it. In fact, my father, I think, is finally beginning to accept it, because with the Karelian tradition, really discuss about the Cherokee heritage behind the tradition. And that kind of puts people into a different perspective. But there are people that under no circumstances are going to accept this around here. And one of my biggest fears is being murdered from a hate crime. Because we have some absolute wacko people around here who believe that we are going through the rapture. And I'm like, how many times have they discussed the rapture over the years, over the millennials? That's been going on since the dawn of man. But they're going to say, oh, well, you don't have to do crystals, you don't have to do meditation, you don't have to do all that, all you have to do is accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And I'm like, but I don't believe in transfiguration. And it's kind of like what Lady Bitterwind said in our particular tradition. The purpose of a priesthood is to prevent man from placing limitations on God. And who in the hell are you to say that God is only in that one facet? So, I mean, it's, I guess coming out of the broom closet it can be a difficult situation when you are in a predominant area of very zealous Christians that own weapons and, it's do or die. And it can be a big challenge as a pagan.
It can. It can. And I appreciate you bringing it up. And that's why I say you always want to be mindful of where you are and the context. And there are other faiths in the world. This is called a world of many faiths. And people are absolutely entitled to their belief systems. What they're not entitled to do is enforce their beliefs on you.
Exactly.
And when you run into people who are strongly polarized for or against other religions, you have to know when to, retreat from a discussion. And I do mean retreat because there are people who will get agitated and feel they have a calling or a mandate to do something. And that's where you need to watch their body language. And as you think about the things that you do, when we worship nature, because there is a high degree of, again, miscommunication of, well, where does magic come from? And you can go back and talk through, well, there's magic in all of these books, and we can look into your own history. And I will find, and I'm, again, not trying to disparage anyone else's faith, but
Right.
in the Abrahamic faiths, there's a pretty strong lack of actually having read their own books on spirituality, particularly in one segment over the other two. And that's something you can't solve.
Right.
What you can do is say, here's who I am. Nature is my religion. I'm working on a relationship with someone, and she said, you spend so much time in nature. I kind of envy that. And I said, it's there for all of us. And, one of the things that people also get into, and again, just changing mindset or putting something out there with humor or with not, sort of derails a lot of the, I know you do this. Well, did you know that in most pagan Wiccan traditions, we have something called a year and a day? Well, what does that mean? It says you really can't become part of the faith or a coven or a group for a year and a day while people get to know you, you get to know them, because this is a pretty deep commitment to all of us. So I'd like you to know that these are the things that are important to us. And, the things you're seeing on my altar or that have appeared in my house, what does the chalice mean to us? Explaining a little bit of the divine feminine. And you will find some, as we say, some sparkling misogyny, right? When it's not out and out hatred of, well, you're in this place. Well, no, men and women. And in fact, if you look at most pagan groups, and even if I look, and again, I'm not an expert in the Corellian tradition, we've got a really high degree of female clergy, and you don't find that in other faiths. That makes people uncomfortable. And that's unfortunate for them. And sharing with my brothers, sisters, and non-binary spiritual friends, I'm all good with that, and I'm at peace with it. For some people, it's hard. Oh, I have crystals. Great. Doesn't make you a witch, but I gotta ask, why do you
Right.
burn incense and have them? Sabbats and moons. Talking about the moon and showing. If you follow me on Facebook, you see a lot of pictures of the moon, and see a lot of pictures of water, and maybe too many close-ups of trees. This is actually some moss growing on some bricks nearby. I put out a lot of pictures of that. Is that what you worship? Do you worship the moss? No, I worship the balance in there, and explaining the difference between that you can be a witch and not a pagan, or pagan and not a witch, though that's, the being a witch and not a pagan is maybe less common. But explaining the background of the symbology is a way to engage people and answer some questions.
I
So
try to look at it. I was going to say, I try to look at it as a way to show the balance of nature, and just showing that, like say the Tao is, there's ways that you're talking about. You don't worship the moth. You actually worship the source of where all of that comes from.
Yep.
And, I try to put that into perspective to some people who do ask questions. But I went to lunch with one of my best friends going back nearly 30 years back, a couple years ago. And she was in tears in the restaurant. And she goes, "Do you not believe in Jesus?" I said, "Well, yeah, I believe that Jesus existed. Do I believe that he was transfigured? I think we're all transfigured. We all live across multiple lifetimes. I just don't believe that there was this higher power that created him in a virgin womb." And, it's a different belief set. And that was the only way I could explain things to her. And she still believed that I was going to go to this fictitious place in the afterlife.
And
So
it's tough, right?
Yeah.
These are core beliefs for a lot of people that have been inculcated to them since they were very small. And they have, however they feel about their faith, they probably have some really deep memories, because we do live in an Abrahamic society where you talk about, and I think I've got the link in here about, privilege based on some faiths, where we have a national holiday that people take off, and it's the most normal thing. And they probably have wonderful memories, for the most part, of that holiday, and maybe 3 or 4 holidays during the year where family gets together. They get gifts, they eat a lot of good food. Maybe they get to hang out with relatives that they only see once in a while, or in rare occasions. So it's tough. So you've got to know your audience when you're speaking. And when you talk about audience, switching to the workplace, you have certain rights in the U.S. And again, this is U.S. centric. I am not an HR professional, but I have done some research here, and I'm sharing some things with you. Title VII, which you can go to the link and read, a very long document that talks about religions being protected classes. And it outlines that those are protected classes not just for well-known faiths like Hinduism, Christianity, Islam, but any sincerely held religious, ethical, or moral belief. So if you're agnostic or an atheist, those beliefs are also protected under this as well. And it defines what harassment is, what discrimination is. And by the way, every state has their own nuances. So if you're an employer, or you have employees that live in California, Michigan, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and other places, there are slightly different rules, laws, and obligations that you as an employer have, or as a supervisor, whatever level that happens to be, to those employees. and vice versa. The government requires reasonable adjustments and accommodations for sincerely held beliefs. So if you have an upcoming Samhain ritual celebration that you really want to come to, and your boss says, hey, I need you to work this day, and you tell them, well, it's Samhain, and they ask you what that is, and you try to explain to them the day before, that's a really hard call, and you're putting a big burden on them because you've never disclosed to them that you have any of these beliefs or feelings or rituals that you do. And it doesn't mean that you need to overshare or you put it on an HR form. But if you do talk about it openly and in the correct context, they are required to give you a reasonable accommodation. Now, if everybody in the company has to work that day for whatever reason, or something about your job requires you to interact with the public in a certain way or customers in a certain way, they are to do an accommodation just as if you had particular handicap or disability reasonably. They cannot change the entire company, nor are they required to do that for you. This is a big, deep topic that we could spend a long time on, and I've only got another 15 minutes, so I want to be mindful because there's a couple of other things I want to get to. Any questions on this? The big C word. There's been a lot of back and forth of, can you be made to take a vaccination? Should you be made to take a vaccination? What are the government's roles in this? We're in kind of a tricky world right now. The government is deputizing or is planning to deputize employers with over 100 people. Whether you believe in the vaccine or not, for whatever reason, making a judgment. The government is going to deputize. So if you claim a religious exemption, you can't claim it the day before. Not going to happen. Let me just be super clear on that, whether I'm an expert or not. Coming to someone at the very last minute and saying, hey, my faith requires 6 days of fasting before I get an injection. You can't do that. And they are required to give you a reasonable accommodation. So if they feel that your role is face-to-face with clients and the general public or others for whatever reason, they do not need to continue to provide employment for you. And again, this is not legal advice, but you have to be very, very specific and careful, as do they, about what you're asking them to accommodate and what accommodation they can give you. Because if it sets you apart from every other employee, then they're discriminating against those employees.
Lawrence,
Yes.
I would say that, it's Lucy, I would say that you should be prepared to explain what part of your belief requires you to either not get an injection, and the big thing that's they're talking about in Tennessee is the people who feel that they don't need to wear a mask. And our governor has a what do you call it? Has put out a statement saying that people don't have to wear a mask if it's for a health reason or if it's against their religious beliefs. Well, I would expect that somebody needs to explain what about their religious beliefs mandates not wearing a mask or mandates not getting a COVID shot before you say, yes, that's your religious preference. If you just say my religion says, no, I don't need to wear a mask, then all you're doing is using your religion as a smokescreen for something you don't want to do.
That is a great way to say it. And again, say it early and say it often. Share, but not proselyte. We do not need to be masked because we are whatever, right? Set your own examples, don't follow others. Just because another religious group has said, well, we don't need to do it because we are God's chosen, because we don't believe in it, or it only smites the wicked. Really tricky to figure out who's wicked and who's not. S.J. Tucker's got a great song called Not the Villain, which I highly recommend to everyone, highly recommend her music to everyone. Set your own examples. Say, here are my core beliefs, and this is